Forget gurus. Forget anyone claiming to be an online business expert without going through the challenges of entrepreneurship themselves. The Real Money, Real Business podcast is here to prove the best insights in online business comes from your fellow online business builders. We dig into stories of entrepreneurs selling their business on the Empire Flippers marketplace so that you can learn how they made their business profitable, how they overcame obstacles, and what lessons they learned in their online journey. If you want to take your business and your knowledge to the next level, you've come to the right podcast. Let's get started.
Hey everyone, welcome to a special edition of our seller interview series. I'm Michelle, and today we have Jason on the show who's selling his business on the Empire Flippers marketplace. Hey Jason, how are you today?
Hi Michelle, great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, I'd really like to thank you for making the time to come on today. Before we dive into the specifics of your business, let's go over a brief summary of it. So it's a SaaS and info product business in the business niche created in May 2014. The average revenue for the business is $18,087 per month, and it makes an average of $7,224 per month in net profit. To remind everyone, included in this sale is a primary domain, including all site content and files, 4 additional domains, 301 redirects, employee contracts, vendor and software contracts, social media accounts for Twitter and LinkedIn, an email list with 24,000 subscribers, a mobile app, and hosting on a separate EU server for GDPR compliance. So now that we've kind of given a brief overview of the business, let's turn it over to Jason. So what can you fill us in on your background in starting and running online businesses?
Sure. I've been interested in entrepreneurship since I was a kid. My father actually ran a business that he turned around. He took over when they had 6 months to live and ended up 6xing it in size over the rest of his career running it. So I was always around kind of an entrepreneurial mindset, I think, from a small age. And when I was in college, I really got hooked on startups. It was when Mark Cuban and Richard Branson were at the peak of their like hype and fame. You know, Cuban had just bought the Mavericks and Branson was doing his like TV show and book and all those things that made him really famous for a few minutes there. And so that really got me into startups. And I had started a couple other smaller companies and things before, and I worked at a couple of startups in Silicon Valley. And I had this idea that when you are running a company, you really want to have good managers. And so how could you do that as your company was scaling? And that got me thinking about what software could maybe help with that. And so when the idea just wouldn't leave my head, I finally decided to do something about it. And that meant interviewing a bunch of managers. Interviewing them, I found there were these common problems. And those common problems became the basis of our software, because we said if we make those things easier for people and we teach people how to do them, then we'll take the really experienced managers who have their own hack system to do these things, make their life better, because hack systems like a spreadsheet or a Google Doc or a little custom thing they hacked on the weekend is not going to be as good as something that you're building long term. And people aren't good managers. If you teach them to do these things, it often solves a lot of their problems because it gets to the root cause of their communication and disengagement issues with their teams.
I think that's really excellent. I love the fact that you went out and spoke to people about what was going on before you decided to build a product to solve those needs. Sometimes we hear the reverse, where people build a product and then they go, well, I think this addresses your needs. Mm-hmm. So that's really solid that you did that. I'm really curious. So you've got multiple monetizations going on with this business. What can you tell us about those?
Yeah, so we have the software line and we have our courses we sell. And so the courses we sell as cohorts, because it turns out when you create scarcity for people, it creates urgency for them to buy. So we'll open up these 19-day windows to sell our courses, and we gradually raise the prices as we get closer to the deadline. And so we find that really helps sell to our email list, especially these courses. And so we've developed that over the last couple of years. I saw some other people selling courses on other topics, and I was like, wait a second, we have a really popular blog. Why wouldn't I repackage that into kind of a course structure? And that turned out to work really well. So that's our course revenue, and it's been going great. It turns out, especially during COVID, people are hungry for ways to still learn. Our more expensive edition of the program involves getting groups of people together to do the training together, and that has worked really well for remote managers to connect with other managers in their companies and things like that. And so that's been really cool. But then our real bread and butter, what we started with was this software for managers. And so I think it's about 2/3 of our revenue now. And it is a way to kind of build those habits. And so on our base feature set, it's just individual managers can come in and bottoms up start using it. It can spread within the organization. And then we'll have times where either a department or a small company will buy it for everybody, at which point we have extra features that HR can use or the executive who bought it can use to kind of keep an eye on how their org is doing, manage the org chart, actually run a really basic form of performance reviews and some things like that.
Oh, that's excellent. So did you have any background in like software development, or how did you build this product up?
My career has been in product management, which means you're the person that interacts with engineers and designers to build the ideal solution while keeping in mind business interests for that. And so I was able to use my product management experience to kind of figure out the first version. And then essentially we've used Upwork people to run all kinds of different parts of the business the whole time. And so the very first engineers that wrote code on it were on Upwork. And I've generally had at least one local engineer involved in the project who then is watching that code.
Yeah, that's a smart way to approach it. So I'm really curious, you've been working on this now for coming up on a decade. So why have you decided to sell the business now?
An 8-year run is a long time. I think there are other things that I am doing in my career that are really interesting and exciting to me. And I look at where our business is, and I think that fresh ideas and a fresh perspective, and potentially depending on what you decide to do with the business, there are things that you could do that I don't think I am able to do. And I'm not sure that I have the couple more years of energy and focus to put into it. I think it's a great inflection point for somebody to take the foundation we built and take it in the direction that they're interested in.
Yeah, I think that's a really positive mindset to go into when you're selling a business, is just kind of knowing where your limitations are and saying, hey, I built this really great product, but I am sort of at the end of what I can do with it. Mm-hmm. And someone else can make it absolutely soar. Mm-hmm. So what would you say was your biggest win since starting this business?
I guess for the business, to myself, from what perspective?
Let's say, is there something that just worked particularly well for you that you think, wow, it exceeded my expectations with what I thought was going to happen as far as the business goes?
I would say the courses were that, because I had seen all these different courses out there that were making money for the founders. Because, often on Twitter, the kinds of people that sell courses on Twitter are the kinds of people who talk about how much money they made on it. So that transparency made me say, wait a second, we could really use another revenue stream to reinvest in the business. Maybe we can do this too. And it was amazing to see how positive the response was from our community, our email subscribers, from the first time we did a course. And it was also cool to see how easy it was to adapt it. So the first version of it was actually 30 days in a row. And it turns out that was overwhelming for people, but rather than getting mad at us and the program falling over, they were just yeah, if you spread this out, I'd be happy. And so we went from writing 30 days in a row of leadership advice to once a week advice, and only 10 to 12 of those. And so it's it got easier, and we made more money when we made it easier for us to produce. So I guess that was pretty cool to see how that worked out. And we've continued to do them. And so we literally have people that I think have bought almost every single program. We have people who have bought 5 and 6 of our program, and we have groups who have bought 2 and 3 of them. And so to me, that's a really strong confirmation that people are hungry for this kind of training as an alternative to really bulky, expensive, and heavyweight options. And that just it worked from the very first experiment, and people were very open and transparent with us. So they made it very easy for us to continue to improve our processes and improve the program.
Yeah, it's got to be a really good feeling, both personally and professionally, when you come up with an idea that really resonates with your audience as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I tried to put in our sim some details about where you can take it. But I think really you'll see our growth rate on it has been pretty great considering, the constraints of making courses. We've found ways to continue to grow it. And I think there's some really strong potential with some of the larger customers we have interested that we're doing a pilot with, and some other things we're doing where it's if you have the creativity and the interest, you can do a lot to grow that, potentially even turning into recurring revenue instead of the one-off revenue we have right now. So that in particular, I think, has both a very strong trend and a really interesting set of avenues you can take it on.
So on the flip side of that, though, what do you think was the biggest challenge or setback that you had while running this business?
I would say selling to HR. I didn't know what I didn't know. There was one person who I had a phone call with as they were heading to Burning Man, which is the most San Francisco thing in the world, that you're getting advice from a successful founder and investor while they're literally packing their car to drive to Burning Man. He told me some of the challenges that we were probably going to run into, and I was a very determined person. And so I didn't really hear him loud and clear what he was trying to tell me. But I would say selling to HR is a different beast, and it's very challenging. And there's a big disconnect between the end user, the manager, and the buyer of HR. And so you have to be prepared for that transition. And we never had the capital or the resources, I think, to really go after that. So it was honestly a bit of a humbling experience to try to sell to HR and then see that, like, despite all the things we had going for us with selling direct to managers, it was a very different and steep learning curve to try to learn the kind of longer sales cycle and different demands that HR has.
Yeah, the times have changed. I don't think that I ever could have envisioned somebody telling me they were talking to somebody about a business while they were packing up to go to Burning Man. That's excellent.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, how are people finding your product and your courses?
It's basically two things. It's word of mouth and it's our blog. So our blog does pretty well on SEO. And so over the years, we've written a lot of posts. What I found is that most managers don't want to go to their boss and say, hey, Michelle, I'm not doing a good job with my team. I have this problem. Like, no one wants to do that. That person decides if they get promoted, if they get a raise, just generally evaluating the performance. And they're often not available because managers of managers can be very busy. And so because of that, it means that you have to seek out help elsewhere. And often that means asking Google. And so it turns out with all the content we've written on how to do feedback, how to give praise, how to have one-on-ones, what to do when X happens, all that kind of advice we've written on the blog, which all came straight from customers asking me questions over the years. It turns out Google likes and rewards that too. So we get a ton of SEO traffic and we turn them into email subscribers. We give them ebook giveaways and things like that. And we eventually convince them to try our software because we're not afraid. And it turns out you're not punished at all if when you're in a blog post, say, on how to fix a problem with an underperformer, and you mentioned, by the way, all this advice I gave you, you could do on your own, or you could sign up for our software and we automate half of what I just told you. It's a pretty good sales pitch. And so we'll get a bunch of people who either subscribe to our blog or read a post to sign up for our software and try it out.
No, that's really smart. And actually, you know, that's something that I had never even considered. You're right. Nobody would go to someone and say, hey, I think I'm doing a really terrible job right now. I need some help on how to be a manager.
Yeah, no one wants to ask their boss, like, how do I do my job? Like, That's probably the last question you want to ask your boss, but a lot of the questions really come down to that.
So what does a typical week look like for you while you're running this business?
It's a mix of things. You know, we've hired a bunch of people kind of part-time to handle different parts of the business. So, you know, we have a part-time support engineer who's kind of frontline on bug smashing. You know, in a given week, I'll interface with them to make sure those bugs are getting fixed, help answer questions that maybe they can't answer because they're more like how to use the software questions than they are like, hey, you know, can you help me with this weird transfer of employees between teams? Obviously, that's something our support engineer can handle or a bug. So I'll spend some time interfacing with them. That's maybe like an hour, 2 hours a week. I do some of the customer support, so I'll answer tickets. We've made a lot of templates in Intercom, so it's a lot of just like inserting the template and hitting send. And so that's maybe like an hour a day of interfacing with customers. And that's a mix of sales where you're talking about like selling a deal with somebody or them expanding to more managers. It's answering questions on Intercom and things like that. I'm also the editor for our marketing team. So I don't create the emails. I don't create the blog posts anymore, but I do read and review them to make sure that, you know, they're up to our standards and, you know, give any feedback. And so that's a few hours a week. And then we're always working on product development, building new features. So we have a designer who I'll meet with 1 hour a week. And that in an hour, we're jamming on ideas. We're talking about the latest mock-ups he's made and things like that, because we always want to make sure that design is ahead of engineering. So when an engineer wants to build the next feature, there are mock-ups waiting for them. And then depending on where we're at in the feature development cycle, we do move pretty slow because it's just a couple engineers on the team. We have one front-end engineer who's full-time. My business partner is then part-time on the business, and he does most of the back-end engineering. Because of that, we do move pretty slowly, which means that I'm only testing staging maybe once a month. But obviously, when we do have something that we may be shipping to customers, we'll test it on staging first. And so I have a special superpower, I think, for finding bugs quickly. So I'm a pretty thorough tester. So usually Eng team's already checked a couple things. I'll come in and find more things to break, and then they'll fix them and we'll sign off and send it to customers.
All right. Well, that's excellent. That was a really good rundown. I know we haven't really gotten into like the specifics of things like churn rate and what you're doing for marketing. You and your business partner, you guys have provided us with an extremely detailed SIM, which we are, you know, is available to anyone listening to this interview. And the answers to a lot of questions that buyers might have will also be included in the frequently asked questions. by the time that this is uploaded. So we're not going to get into too much of that, but I do want to thank you for providing us with such a great resource. I really recommend that anyone listening go check that out. But I did want to ask you, what do you think the biggest challenge will be for a buyer taking over this business?
I read those books, Choose Your Own Adventure, as a kid. You know that sometimes the decision you choose, you turn the page and you're like, and you did X, Y, and Z, and you start going down this road and you're like, oh, I don't like how the story goes. And now you try to page back to the story and choose the other direction. I think where Lighthouse is today, like I said, we have a foundation, but you do need to make a call on what kind of business you want to build. And so one form of the business, I think, is continuing to double down on selling direct to managers. And I think that there is an opportunity to actually focus more. So you may want to focus on engineering managers or customer success managers. You may want to launch more tools that they want. You may want to target, different ways to distribute to a mid-level leader in some of those departments. Alternatively, the other thing you can do is you can say, hey, this is a really cool product. And if I combined it with 3 or 4 other products in the market around employee engagement, we can actually do a roll up and we can start selling to HR in a way that we weren't able to individually, because HR likes to buy products that are a mile wide and just deep enough to deliver value. And so we can be a piece of that play, but you need to be very conscious from the start which direction you want to go, because they will shape your product roadmap, they will shape your marketing, they will shape the structure of your team, and they will structure any capital investments you should make very differently. So I think the biggest challenge is you have to decide what you want to turn this business into and charge in that direction, recognizing that every step you take on either of those directions is going to build a very different business on top of the foundation we're giving you.
Excellent. And so, Jason, I wanted to ask, you are willing to commit to a non-compete for a potential buyer who's interested in this business. And how much support are you offering buyers?
I think it's a case-by-case basis. Again, we're willing to work with you. I look at this just like we talked about the negotiation question. It's as long as you're treating us fairly, we're willing to treat you fairly. Certainly, we're open to making sure it's a smooth handoff and being available to help you for things. I think the main thing is just making sure that we, kind of use our time wisely and have a good solid plan. I don't want to infinitely commit. My business partner and I are both looking to step away from the business. We're not looking to be employees, but we're happy to make it a smooth transition. And I think we have some ideas on how we can do that the most effective way. I think we're happy to work that way. And certainly I think this is also an example of another lever that we can pull as we kind of negotiate on an agreement, because, you can certainly, we would expect to be compensated for our time. And so, depending on what your concerns are and what you're looking for, we can certainly set up availability over, a set period of time. So you're sure that you can have access to us if either a problem comes up or you just want to make sure that hey, I know you're going to give me a lot of stuff up front, but I want to be able to check in a couple of times after that. I had a friend who sold a business recently, and that was one of the things they did. And that turned out to be one of the best decisions they made, because it did create a deal structure that was more appealing to my friend who sold his company, because there was another set of capital, coming in for his time. And at the same time, the business was super happy, because while they got a bunch of stuff up front answered from him, they were able to make the most of the time after that and actually be able to say, hey, actually, we still have some more questions. We're really glad we paid to engage you, a couple months later to circle back and get more detail, because there was just things we didn't see up front. So I'm happy to work with any business to make sure they have what they need. And again, I think it's just hey, let's go into this negotiation looking to be fair to all sides and figure out ways to pull levers that make both sides really happy. And as long as we do that, we're happy to work with you on what makes the most sense to make a smooth handoff, as long as you're willing to work with the constraints we have on our sides as well.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. And if you could go over quickly, whether you're open to negotiating something like an earnout, because I know that you have some thoughts about that as well, that kind of go along with what you were just saying.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, it comes down to you scratch my back, I scratch yours. You're willing to be fair and give on a few things for me. I'm willing to be fair and give on a few things for you. So I think we're open to an earnout. Obviously, we don't want the earnout to be over 50% of it. But if you want to do an earnout for some smaller fraction of it, we're willing to talk about it. We'll have questions around the fact that we're in a hyperinflationary state. And so a dollar today is worth significantly less than a dollar in 6 months. And so we'll have some questions around that. And certainly, it depends on what other levers are being pulled for it. The tax implications on an asset sale are pretty brutal. My business partner does live in California. So I think you could do the math on your own to figure out what that might look like. So if you're willing to work with us on some things like goodwill and, consulting rate to maybe sweeten the price a little bit and things like that, we're happy to work with you as well on kind of spreading out the payments and things like that. So it all comes down to, look, I know there are literally like a dozen levers for us to pull on our side. I know your side is going to have also levers, and I'm more than happy to be like, well, if you're willing to work with us on this, the tax savings for us is going to be enormous. So I'm happy to work with you on how that plays out. So I would say, again, it's like, hey, as long as we come to the table together, wanting to create a win-win scenario and not a scarcity mindset, I think we can work out something that'll work out well for both sides.
Yeah, I think that's a totally fair perspective. And before we wrap up, Jason, I just wanted to ask, if you're putting yourself in the shoes of a buyer, why would you say this is a business worth buying?
I think in addition to the dollars and cents of this business, it's been around for 8 years, so it has staying power. We survived the darkest days of COVID. I think that it's not only a business that you can run and operate and you can see the potential and see the things you can do with it, and that's exciting. You also have to remember, we're making people better managers every day. Like, this is a mission that you can be excited and proud that you're a part of. I know one of the intrinsically motivating things about this is just seeing the way that we help managers and getting those stories and emails from your customers being like, hey, I just got promoted, like, again. And it's like, we have people who have used Lighthouse across multiple companies. We have people who have literally gone from like line engineer to CTO of startups in like a very short span. We have people who were individual contributors who their managers used it and then they started using it, and now like they run 400-person departments. And they can literally directly point to the habits that we help them with, the things we help them do, has literally helped like advance their career. And so I think that's like a really rewarding mission to work on, that, if you were in like the self-storage business or you were just selling widgets, you may not get that same feeling, but this can be a really rewarding thing on top of being a good SaaS business to work on.
I think that's an excellent point to leave off on. And I really, really like that. Jason, I want to thank you for taking the time out of your day. I know you've got a lot going on, but I really appreciate you coming on this call and giving us a little bit more insight into both yourself and your business.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Michelle. And it's been great to work with Empire, and I'm excited to see who we'll get to talk to as potential new owners of the business.
Well, great. And so to wrap up, for anyone listening, if you want to learn more, please schedule a call with Jason. And just as a reminder, you guys are listening to the seller interview for listing 59845. So I want to thank everyone for listening and enjoy your digital journey.